The passage of time has not been kind to the Nikon F4. Upon its release, it was highly sought after superstar, bristling with modern advancements, and it really was the bridge between the classic manual focusing SLR and the autofocusing, auto-metering flagship camera. But nowadays, this Nikon F4, well, I mean, it's just too modern to be considered like a vintage cool camera, but it's also too archaic to be considered as like an everyday carry film camera. And it's interesting that the Nikon F3, it gets all the prestige, all the love, highly desirable, inflated pricing. It really is this sort of classic vintage pro film body, whereas the Nikon F4 gets left behind as like the redheaded stepchild. Well, you know what? I happen to love redheads, and today's video is my love letter to this camera. I've got a lot of history with it, and in my opinion, I'm going to argue today that this is at least the greatest manually focusing film camera of all time. I'm Chris Niccolls. This is PetaPixel. Now, while we're on the topic of pricing, a great resource to check out is KH.com. I mean, you know that we love them. They're PetaPixel's official pre-owned camera gear partner, and we love them because they got a really good search engine. So I can put in Nikon F4, and it brings up a whole bunch of options, and you can see here the pricing. I mean, KH.com is going to tell me the condition, is there LCD bleed, is there damage, is it an ugly shape or pristine shape, and then you can see the price accordingly. And so if this video inspires you to get a Nikon F4 for yourself, you should definitely check out KH.com. There's a bunch on there right now. And look, you get a free 180-day warranty to make sure that what you buy is going to last, and they also have a generous return policy. You should definitely check them out. All right, let's get back to the Nikon F4. Now, we're very fortunate because we've dodged the Canadian winter. We actually find ourselves here in San Francisco. Beautiful day today, although it's going to start raining pretty soon, so I got to get to this. But my photographic journey actually started in the streets of Calgary. And I want to give you guys a little bit of history and context with my relationship with this camera. So when I started photography, I mean, it was like 25 years ago, 27 years, something like that. And I started a Nikon FE, and I just wandered the streets, manually focusing, manual exposure, kind of just like teaching myself everything I need to know about photography and darkroom developing. I was mostly shooting black and white. And then when I was in my early 20s, young man, I went to London, England, just a great experience to get away from family, be on your own, kind of see how you can just handle being in a different country and just make it work. I really loved that experience. I also shot a lot more there. And as I was taking pictures there, I realized I need to get something a little bit more serious than the FE. And I immediately fell in love with the Nikon F4 because it's like a classic photojournalist tool. And I was shooting a lot more weddings at that point, getting into events, doing like CD covers for friends and stuff like that. It was just a really exciting time in my photography. Now, when I was working in London, I was at a photo lab, so at least I saved on developing costs, but I wasn't making a ton of money. But I was able to build like a decent quiver of manual focus Nikkor lenses. And why I chose the F4, what really drew me to that was, frankly, I could afford it. Now, at that time, it was only about 13 years old, so it still was fairly expensive, but it wasn't Nikon F5 expensive, all right? And this would still give me the ability to use my manual focus lenses, but get things like modern metering, faster shutter speeds. This thing goes up to 8,000th of a second, better viewfinder, just rugged build and design and more capability. So besides the muscular good looks of the Nikon F4, what really drew me into this was the fact that it was a fantastic camera for shooting manual focus lenses. It did autofocus, but this was kind of a downside for the Nikon F4. It had an unfortunate history because the fact is when it came out in 1988, it was the first autofocusing pro body for Nikon, and it just didn't really autofocus very fast. I mean, it just couldn't keep up. You got to remember too that this came out at a time where it had to fight directly against Canon, and the Canon EOS system was just killing it with fast, reliable autofocusing, which really pushed Canon into the hands of professional shooters doing journalism, wildlife, and sports. And I think that stigma follows the Nikon F4 to this day. Okay, so the Nikon F4 may not have been a race car when it came to autofocusing speed, but it was actually designed by a race car designer, the famous Italian designer Giorgetto Giugiaro from Ital Design. He actually also designed the Nikon F3. And so if you think that's a beautiful camera, you should think this is a beautiful camera. A lot of people don't though, but this is my video, it's my love letter, and I think it's gorgeous. But you know what, this is the Bay Area, the weather can be unpredictable, and it's supposed to rain here later in the afternoon, so let's get some time in shooting, and I'm going to talk about why I love this camera so much. So I have this thing about me, my personality, where if I own things like cameras or fishing rods, anything kind of like that, something that has use but that I can end up collecting too many of, I don't like having stuff sitting around. I feel like it's just getting dusty and aged, and I really feel like somebody should be using it and appreciating it. So what I'm trying to get at is I often end up selling a lot of the stuff that I don't end up using. It did actually lead to one of my biggest regrets, because that Nikon F4 that I bought in London that I had so much history with, that I learned a lot about photography with, I ended up selling it. And that was a mistake. And it was just because, digital SLRs were coming out. I was working at the camera store. I was getting employee deals. And so I just decided to really firmly invest in modern glass and digital bodies and learn that, not only for my own photography, but for the YouTube channel and for my career. But I never should have got rid of that F4. I honestly don't even remember where it went. And so it was just a thing that was nagging at me for like 15 years. And it's just funny how these things work out, because I find myself in Tokyo, Japan on assignment, and I just decide to go to Kitamoto Camera, and I happen to see this beautiful Nikon F4. It's an S, it's got the grip, it's not my favorite version, but $300 Canadian in this shape. I mean, it was just incredible. No LCD bleed, everything beautiful. It just felt like kismet, it felt like fate, and so I had to buy it. And now that I have this camera again, I'm really excited, which is why I wanted to make this episode for you guys. So the Nikon F4 is carrying on the same tradition that we saw with the F, the F2, and the F3, where you have interchangeable viewfinders and prisms. I've got the standard metering prism on here, but you got waist level finders, you got magnified finders, you got action finders, all sorts of stuff. But there's also quite modular in the grip itself. But you know what? The first thing we have to address, there's no getting past the fact that this is a physically large and heavy camera, and a lot of people notice that right off the bat. Now, at the time, having this larger body was in a lot of ways desirable for a professional camera, because it means you can make it rugged. It also balances long, heavy sports lenses really well. That has to be considered, and it just gives you a stable shooting platform. I mean, this has a lot of advanced technology inside. I mean, look, this camera is almost 40 years old, but it had a revolutionary combination carbon fiber and advanced aluminum shutter mechanism, rated for 150,000 shots. This thing had counterbalances, not only for the mirror, but also for the shutter mechanism, which would counteract any sort of mirror slap and shutter shock. Combine that with the heavyweight, absolutely. I mean, even at its lightest with the MB20 grip, this thing weighs 1,090 grams. But what I first noticed when I started shooting this in low light situations, concerts and nighttime events and stuff like that, I could shoot this at very slow shutter speeds and get very sharp detail. I would actually say the Nikon F4 took the sharpest photos I would get out of any of the Nikon cameras I used at the time. Now, the lightest option for this camera, that MB20 grip, I'm actually looking to find one right now. They are quite expensive, oddly enough. They're about as expensive as the camera is. I should just buy another F4 with the grip. It would probably be the same price. But I really want that to cut the weight down, because what I have here is the Nikon MB21 grip. Now, this was the classic option in the States. Technically, the F4 is called the F4S when you have this grip on here. And as you can see, it gives me a vertical shutter, but I never use that. It also does take 6 AA batteries in there, so it adds some weight and bulk. But, there's also an even larger option. You can get the MB23 grip, then it's called the Nikon F4E. This is super heavy, big battery brick on the bottom. And this is really intended for pro shooters to shoot big events all day long. And one quick aside that I want to make here, the Nikon F4 did catch some flack, because up to this point, Nikon F flagship bodies did have mechanical backup shutter speed. So worst case scenario, if your batteries died or you had an electrical failure, you could still use the camera. The Nikon F4 was technically not the first. It did have kind of a mechanical backup, but in practical terms, it did not. So let's just say this camera was very battery dependent, and you always wanted to have batteries with you. But look, AA's, you could use NiCads in here, you could use LR6s, and you can get AA's anywhere. So shooting a camera and enjoying it isn't just about the image quality, it's also about the shooting experience. And one of the things I love here is the sound of the shutter on the F4. I mean, it's distinct. Listen to this. Like, if that's not classic 80s photojournalist right there, I don't know what is. And here on the burst, this is your high-speed burst. Again, I'm going to push about almost 6 frames per second here. Like I'm on a fashion shoot. Now, interestingly enough, the Nikon F4, well, does have a lower speed here as well, just, to save you some money on that film, but it also has what they call the silent shutter. It's not really silent, but well, you'll hear it here. It actually stretches out the reload of the shutter mechanism to make it a little bit less obvious. So if you're in a quiet situation, listen to this. You still get the shutter sound, but you don't get that second clank. It just kind of slows it down. Oh, so pretty. Now, all of this extra real estate on the camera means that there's a lot of space for controls, and that's one of my favorite things about this camera, the control scheme. So everything's got locking switches, and it's large and easy to turn. I mean, this was made for shooting in war zones and like nasty weather with gloves on as well, for example. So everything is designed really nicely. I love the oversized exposure compensation switch. Again, I can lock that. The on-off switch locks and goes through all my drive functionality, and I actually like that I can do this one-handed. It's very comfortable with the grip to just automatically turn that on and off before I shoot. This can shoot up to 4 frames per second if you use the classic MB20 grip, the smallest one. With this, the larger MB21, it'll shoot about 5.7 frames per second. So it was no slouch when it came to sports and action for the time. I love that I've got a manual rewind knob here. It's got the easiest reload mechanism. It's automatic, but when it comes to rewinding, I can do it manually, and I love that experience. There's something about that to end a roll, so I appreciate that it has that. DX coding for the ISO, but I can also set that manually as well. Got a great mirror lockup switch. If I push down the depth of field preview button and then flick this switch, my mirror is locked up. That's really cool as well. So if I'm doing tripod work and long exposures, autofocus lock, exposure lock, I can even combine those together into one function. I've got my autofocusing controls over here. This camera is just designed beautifully. And one of the main things that I really appreciated when I first looked through the Nikon F4 is this beautiful DP20 viewfinder. So this is totally removable. I can pull this off and I can change it for other accessories like I mentioned, but this gives me a large, bright, 100% coverage of the 35mm full frame neg. It also gives me advanced metering. So this was the first Nikon Pro body to offer matrix metering, Nikon's multi-segment metering that nowadays we take for granted, you know, but this was really cool. Now I also have a spot meter in the body itself, got center weighted meter, but this matrix metering really unlocked a lot of potential when shooting manual focus lenses. And it was a big step up from the classic center weighted metering that I was used to on the Nikon FE. Just more predictable. I could point this camera at more contrasty scenarios without having to compensate as much or even at all. And I really preferred it to the Nikon F3's 80-20 split center weighted metering. You also had beautiful diopter control on the DP20. You even have a way to customize the exposure meter, either to your preference. You can force it darker or brighter by default, but also to compensate for all the different interchangeable screens you can get for the inside of this camera. So maybe you want grids or, you know, something like that, like frame lines, all that kind of stuff can be bought and customized because this was a professional body. I also love the fact that you've got a built-in illuminator here. I can click this and then inside my viewfinder, it glows green, which is super helpful if you're shooting in low light situations. When I look through here, I get a nice LCD display. It's going to show me things like frames remaining and like shutter speed and all that kind of stuff. But aperture is still done through a classic window looking down onto the actual silk-screened aperture on the lens itself. I love that nod to it as well. And this is also cool. We're going back to a classic hot shoe. The F3 had this really annoying sort of novel design. I never liked it. I always had to use adapters anyways, didn't like it. This goes back to a proper hot shoe, which is of course more universal for all the accessories out there like triggers and stuff, but also it gives you full TTL flash capability. Oh, and I can even close the back of the viewfinder here, so if I've got this on a tripod and there's a light source coming through the back, it's not going to change the metering. And the best part of this viewfinder as well, especially for manual focusing and why this is the greatest manual focus camera of all time, because this is an autofocusing body, if I put vintage glass on here, even without any sort of electrical connection, it will give me autofocus confirmation. So I'll actually see 2 red arrows, which indicate what the direction to actually turn the manual focus ring, and then a green circle when I confirm focus. And this is awesome if I'm shooting really wide aperture lenses, or I just want that second opinion on whether it's in focus. I just really love that feature as well. So yeah, the timing for the Nikon F4 was a little bit unfortunate. It just came a little bit too early in the autofocusing game to make a huge impact. Even then, it still works just fine. And if you use AFD or AFS lenses, you get full electrical connectivity, you get all the metering, you get program mode, shutter priority, all that kind of good stuff. But from my own personal experience, this was great having a lot of Nikkor AI and AIS manual focus lenses. You can use pre-AI lenses on here with, you know, some loss of functionality, but you can absolutely still put them on there. But when you use AI and AIS, that's where you get the automatic aperture indexing with the body, you get full matrix metering, you get the autofocus confirmation. I get aperture priority shooting or full manual, which I'm going to use 99.9% of the time anyways. Pretty much the only thing I can't put on here is Nikon Z mount mirrorless lenses, so I guess that makes it the worst camera of all time again. Okay guys, so I know we're taking a bit of a detour from our regular video, but we're just walking down Maiden Lane in San Francisco and we see the Camera West store. We go in and this is crazy. Look, they've got all of this vintage stuff here. They got so much stuff. And so I just had to talk about it because we have 85mm f1.8D. I really want that. The Micro Nikkor 105. These are all D-series autofocusing lenses. These are screw drive. These are the ones that work on this body but focus pretty slow. But you got to give the Nikon F4 credit because when Nikon did come out with their later AFS series lenses, those actually breathed new life into this camera. Those focus very quickly on this body and are quite effective. I really love having this camera in my hands again, and I hope that's come through in this episode. And more so, I just want to advocate for the Nikon F4 because I think it got a bad rap, and hopefully I've, given you guys some illumination about this particular camera. Making this episode has been a lot of fun. It also really reminds me of the other episode that we made about the Panasonic GM5 where I was in New York City, because that was, in my opinion, the greatest camera of all time for me. And I get that it's a very personal experience and that camera is very flawed. This camera has plenty of flaws, absolutely. I'm not trying to say that it doesn't, but in the right situation, this can be a really beautiful experience. And so I think the F4 deserves more love than it gets. And hopefully this has illuminated, just some of this amazing flagship camera for you guys. If you find yourself in a situation where you have Nikkor AI and AIS lenses, this might be a really cool experience that you also want to give a try. Holy shit, you know what else I just realized? I sold the Panasonic GM5 as well and immediately regretted it. So let's take another life lesson away from this. If you really truly love something, put it in a glass showcase, forget about it for decades, but don't get rid of it, hold on to it. Maybe that's an important lesson, at least for me. Look, the Nikon F4, it's a big beast, but it's beautiful, rugged, a stable shooting platform, one of the best viewfinders you will ever look through on a camera. It's got good speed, good metering, advanced technology that you can apply to manual focus lenses to provide a unique shooting experience. I love it. I hope you guys love it now, or at least found this episode interesting and maybe just connected with you somewhere deep in your soul with stuff that you love that you may regret now getting rid of. Tell us your long-lost love stories in the comments below. And I'm sure we'll talk about this experience on the podcast. So you should definitely check that out as well. PetaPixel Podcast, this exact same channel, or you can listen to it on all your favorite podcasting apps. Consider also supporting us with a PetaPixel.com membership. You can see all the benefits here on the screen, $3 a month, $30 a year. It's a bargain. And I want to give you guys a big thank you as well, because those contributions you make through the PetaPixel.com memberships make this trip to San Francisco possible. So let us have these experiences and share it with you. So we really appreciate that. I hope to see you soon with more here on PetaPixel soon.